Okay, so now we're going to talk about conditioned feelings. We call them conditioned feelings because these are the feelings that show up every time we have the same thoughts that get programmed into our brain around the things that are fearful for us. So let's get started. So we are really talking about the source of discomfort that is the thing that makes us act. So if we look again here, we start with the trigger, then there's the automatic thoughts. But if we're paying attention to what's happening in our body, usually the thing we become aware of first is these conditioned feelings. And there's an X through it because it's the feelings that we don't want to feel. So the behavior is always motivated by trying to get away from certain feelings. Because those feelings were intolerable, and many of us shut them down in childhood because we were in danger and in fear all of the time, we actually want to find a way to shut them down now. And that's what leads to our out of control behaviors. It's the not wanting to feel. And these out of control behaviors usually are very well practiced in a way that shuts the feelings down for us effectively. So the thing to remember about conditioned feelings is that they're always the same feelings that come up with the same or similar trigger. So you're not going to have a trigger or a tripwire show up and then have different feelings show up next time, although there can be a whole range. So people can say this is what the trigger is, and the trigger brings up a half a dozen different feelings, but they will be the same group of different feelings every time. And those feelings usually feel real right now. They usually feel like they're about what's going on right now, even though they have their foundation in the past. They have their foundation in the past and are almost always old, like a majority old. When we look about what percentage of that energy in our body is connected to feelings that are solely about what's happening right now, if it's a trigger or a tripwire and it's creating a larger response than kind of makes sense in the current situation, then we can know that it's almost always connected to something old. And the thing that you need to recognize is that understanding how to avoid and get away from these feelings is how you survived. And so that practice of keeping yourself safe is a positive. It's something that worked well to keep you here. So the key to change, though, to healing, is changing our response to those feelings. And the first way we want to change our response to the feelings is we want to stop being afraid of them. Here's the thing. You already survived whatever it was that you were going through that was so terrifying that you had to shut yourself down. You've already survived it. So feeling those feelings now cannot hurt you more than the potential of that thing outside of you hurting you when you were little. I want you to remember that. Feelings are just feelings. They can be scary, but you've already been through that. You've already experienced it. You've already successfully survived it. You can now successfully survive the experiencing of the feelings in order to heal yourself. The other thing to remember, and I'm going to say it again, is that avoiding the feelings was a survival skill. Paying attention to them is the key to healing. And your feelings, when they come up like that and they're overwhelming, if you actually stop yourself and pay attention, those feelings are usually not related to the current situation. Occasionally they are. Occasionally there's a small percentage that is currently reinforcing those same feelings, but most of the time it's old. And if it is something that's current, then maybe you need to do something to make sure that you're safe, like set a boundary or say something about what you need if you're not feeling safe in the current moment. What we want to do is we want to develop strategies so that you can meet your needs now. So even if it's something old and you're shutting down and you're responding to it as a trauma threat that's not present currently, but is present in your memory, we want to say, okay, wait a minute, what are my needs now? How do I get my needs met now? So in the example, my going into the kitchen, every single time I've gone into the kitchen, until today actually, has been with fear. And it was all old. It was 100% old. 100% old. So what do I want to do? I want to develop a strategy so I can meet my needs now and reprogram my brain that the kitchen is a place where my needs get met, not a place where my needs get threatened. Okay, that's what we want to do. So I want to go to the kitchen with an expectation that good things are going to happen instead of an expectation that there will be fear. I hope that makes sense. So remember the hamburger solution? The trigger goes straight to the compulsive behavior. It's called a solution because that solution, as long as we're chewing, effectively shuts down all of those scared feelings. And that's the thing to remember. We have to pay attention to the feelings to heal them. But things like the hamburger solution and other kind of addictive behaviors that we do compulsively, shopping, compulsive sex, compulsive drinking, eating, all of that stuff shuts down feelings. These are the feelings we want to pay attention to in order to heal. So what are the interpersonal hamburger solutions? Automatically saying yes, even when you'd prefer to say no. Saying I'm sorry when you don't need to say I'm sorry because you haven't done anything wrong. Screaming and yelling. If you feel threatened and start to feel fear, and instead of thinking, what is it that I'm experiencing right now? And instead of talking about it and identifying what you need and looking for a way to get your need met, you start screaming and yelling. That's an interpersonal hamburger solution. How about not talking about it when something's bothering you? Survivors of childhood trauma often do not state their needs. That's an interpersonal hamburger solution. I don't have to be afraid if I don't have any needs. Or getting back at someone in secret because you're hurt and you don't want to address it directly. It's passive-aggressive behavior and shutting down. So I'm giving you some of these examples, but it would be good for you to spend some time looking at what your personal, interpersonal hamburger solutions are. And I put the image of a woman in a cage because we think that we are who we are, and these are just the way we are, how we choose to be. But many of those things are things that keep us feeling safe in relationship that we don't necessarily need to do to keep ourselves safe, especially if there's no present threat. So I want you to be really looking at feelings. How do you avoid scared feelings in your interpersonal relationships? And what do you do so that you don't feel those feelings? Thing to remember about these conditioned feelings is that we want to develop strategies to meet your needs now and to reprogram the brain. So even though you might feel compelled to doing a certain thing, like saying thank you, like saying I'm sorry, you might feel compelled to it. Remember, that feeling isn't an action. I might feel compelled to eat roasted nuts. The feeling isn't a commandment. I realize I just said the feeling isn't an action. We don't have to do anything in the moment that we feel strong feelings. It's okay to stop and go, okay, what is my body trying to tell me? And is it real? Is the threat I'm responding to real? Remember in my first marriage, it's so funny because I've kind of gone full circle with this kitchen thing. I left my home with the habit of cleaning when I thought I was in trouble or to try to avoid being in trouble. And in my first marriage, every time I thought he was mad at me, I was cleaning the kitchen. And it's interesting that it was the kitchen, right? So Then one day I was cleaning the kitchen when I thought he was mad, and I stopped myself and I thought, wait a minute, I think he's mad at me and I'm cleaning the kitchen. These things are not related. So I'm going to stop. And I stopped cleaning the kitchen. That was the compulsive behavior. I felt afraid. I thought, well, wait a minute, is there a real threat here? So I went and asked him, are you mad at me? He wasn't mad at me, but I was really good, and trauma survivors do this too. We get really good at watching other people and making an interpretation in our head about what we think might be going on for them, and then kicking into compulsive behavior to alleviate our own fear. And we may not have even interpreted the other person's behavior correctly. So remember that when we have a conditioned feeling and we want to just pop into some behavior to make us feel better, it's time to stop and listen and be inquisitive. Is this really a situation I'm responding to in real time, or am I responding to something old? The other thing I want you to remember is that you're only going to work on one trigger at a time. So pick one. So when I say pick one, I'm meaning one compulsive behavior, right? One compulsive behavior. So let's say that you're working on saying I'm sorry, or you're working on compulsive cleaning, or you're working on some behavior that you do toward yourself that you want to improve. Focus on that one until you're able to clear away the triggers to heal it. The feeling that comes up for you right before you start doing that behavior is what you want to pay attention to, and recognize that you can sit with the feeling. Try to identify what the feeling is and what the thoughts are that are going into that feeling before you do anything. We want to start to notice, to be observant, to be open and curious about what's happening inside of us and how things are connected. And this is how we'll be doing it. So I want you to strive to stop making decisions because of your fear, especially if you know that you're safe. Instead, figure out what you need. We get so good at acting on our fears and really quickly responding to what we perceive as a threat that we don't even pay attention to the reality. A whole different behavior could be the right behavior to choose to meet that unmet need. But if we don't stop and think about it, the unmet need never gets met, even though the compulsive behavior we're using to try to get the need met doesn't match. So I want you to really stop and pay attention. Am I safe? What does this feeling make me want to do? And what is it that I really need? So when I was in undergraduate school, I discovered that I often wanted to compulsively eat, when I either one, needed a nap, or had too much to do and as much time that I was given to do it. So I started paying attention to every time I felt compelled to go downstairs instead of studying and grab some baked goods that I had made secretly for the purpose of my own binges. And I stopped eating at the moment of compulsion long enough to pay attention and go, what's really going on here? So at the time I was studying physics, chemistry, and calculus, so there was too much for me to learn in the time I had. I had a 2-year-old with special needs and in a pretty abusive relationship. So I would always want to be compulsively eating. And I noticed when I was home studying, paying attention to the fact that I wanted to leave my studies to go eat, I started saying, what is it that I really need right now? The answer, sometimes it was a nap. Sometimes it was more hours to get some problems solved for my classes. In each case, I would either stop for a nap or soothe myself and say, well, I can only do as much as I can do. But I know that if I go downstairs and spend a half hour eating, I'll get less done here. So I started working through and thinking about how will I get better at meeting my needs. So that's what I want you to do. And the last thing is, how do you know if your feelings you're experiencing in your body connected to a certain trigger or tripwire are mostly old? How do you know that? And it's usually because it's an out of proportion response to a current situation. So in my kitchen example, I never could go into the kitchen for a prolonged task without having music in my ears. I had to soothe myself with that. It's an out of proportion response. Now I can see that. Often we'll feel a very strong, so I don't know if you've experienced this, that somebody says something or does something around you and you feel this like rush of adrenaline in your body. That's probably related to something old, unless somebody is currently hurting you. And then the third is other people respond to you like you've overreacted. So those are the situations to know if it's old. If you look around and you're safe, but you feel like a bear is chasing you, you're probably responding to something old. Okay? So what if the feelings are old, but they feel really real? That's the nature of complex trauma. So I want you to use your breath. You now know how to use the breath. You should have been practicing it all along. And I want you to take the time to evaluate. Am I safe? If you're actually safe, the feelings are probably old. And then I want you to use the half sheet exercise. Now the half sheet exercise, I called it originally the half paper exercise, but I will upload it here into the lessons for you as well. But that's how you know if they're old. If they're old and they feel real, these are the things that you do. Now we're leading up to the 6 steps to healing a trigger, but I want you to have all of the pieces really well understood before we get there, so that once we get there, you can hit the ground running. So the half sheet exercise is really powerful to help you get out of old feelings, to help you recognize the difference between things that are old and things that are real right now. And basically what you're going to be doing is, on one half of the paper you're going to be writing then at the top, and the other part you're going to be writing on the other half, you're going to be writing now at the top, and then you're going to write all of the details about the memory, and you're going to contrast those details with the current situation details. So I will be putting a video that has a much more detail in it about how to get this done. And of course, if you have questions about it, please drop them in a message to me, and I will make sure to answer that in the live Q&A that we do on Wednesday. So in the next lesson, we're going to go to the next part of the cycle, which is looking at in control versus out of control behaviors. So I'll see you in the next lesson.